I'm Umbreon Libris, and recently when we did that live theory session with Toby and Loxton, I brought up two questions that we touched on, but we didn't really go as in-depth as I think they deserved. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to answer the first one of those questions. And that is, can vegetarians eat grass-type Pokemon? And as kind of a sub-question to that, can vegans eat the products of grass-type Pokemon? Now, the reason I think this question is interesting is that there's a couple of layers to it, and it includes the relationship between humans and Pokemon, and it also involves the biology of Pokemon as opposed to animals and plants. I'm also going to touch on a number of topics from past PokéStudies videos, which you don't need to watch if you haven't already seen them, but if you do watch them, that might give you a better understanding of some of my justifications. So the kind of fundamental question that I think we need to establish first is, are Pokemon animals? And we know that real-world animals have existed in the Pokemon world at some point. They are sometimes referenced in Pokédex entries. They are frequently referenced in Pokemon category names, also in the Pokédex. And of course, they're also referenced in the names of the Pokemon themselves. And since people are the ones giving names to things, I think it's reasonable to assume that there's an in-world reason for that name that is roughly equivalent to the real-world reason. So just like an Ursa ring, for example, is called Ursa ring because it looks like a bear with a ring on its belly, and that applies just as much to the real world for us and Game Freak and the localization teams looking at Ursaring and giving it that name, as well as it does for someone within the Pokemon world looking at an actual Ursaring and calling it an Ursaring. Humans also exist in the Pokemon world, and humans are animals, although there is a possibility, a theory, that the humans of the Pokemon world are actually Pokemon, but that's not a theory that really convinces me, and so I'm going to stick with the assumption that the humans of the Pokemon world are animals and not Pokemon. We have insufficient evidence for how or when Pokemon would have shown up in this world, so it is possible that Pokemon are evolved from animals, that Pokemon are a branch off of the animal family tree, and there are many Pokemon that just look and act a lot like real-world animals. Like, there isn't really that much of a difference between a Barraskewda and just a regular Barracuda that happens to have magical powers. So it's possible that Pokemon are just animals plus magical abilities. But Pokemon are also different from animals in really fundamental ways, even if you ignore the magical part. And my main reason for that is the breeding mechanics of Pokemon, in that almost every single Pokemon is able to interbreed, either directly or indirectly. So, for example, you can take a Mothim and a Steelix, two very different Pokemon, but they actually can both breed with a Crustle. And so it's possible to have gene exchange between a Mothim and a Steelix, represented in the games in the form of IVs, natures, moves, that kind of thing. Which means that Mothim and Steelix are actually more closely related than humans are to chimpanzees, our closest living relatives. So if all Pokemon share such a huge portion of their DNA, but are still able to be and look and act as different as a Mothim and a Steelix, I think they really have to be unique between real-world organisms. I don't know that there's any single species with this level of variability in any kingdom of Earth life. So some of that could be the magical element, but I think it has to go deeper than that. I think there has to be a biological element to it as well. So Pokemon could be an entirely unique kind of organism. So not animals, not plants, not bacteria or fungi or anything. Something unique with biological mechanisms unlike anything we know. So Pokemon are not animals. But this is a world where Pokemon outcompeted real-world animals and replaced animals in many of their ecological roles. So, just like we eat animals, the people of the Pokemon world would eat Pokemon. And of course, some people would object to that, and that's how we arrive at Pokemon vegetarians and vegans. But vegetarianism and veganism are probably way more common in the Pokemon world than they are in ours, and that's because one of the roles that Pokemon replaced real-world animals in is in their relationship to humans. And I think the human-Pokemon relationship is something similar to the relationship humans have with dogs. They are intelligent, domesticable creatures that we've formed a pretty strong, mutually beneficial relationship with. The specifics would vary by Pokemon, but generally speaking, I think that's the relationship. So just like with dogs, eating Pokemon would be kind of taboo. There's a good chance that you find the idea of consuming a dog for food repulsive. And that's partly because of the relationship that we have with dogs, which is not what we have with, like, cows or salmon, for example. But in the Pokemon world, that's the relationship with every Pokemon. So there's probably still people who are totally fine with eating something like a Farfetch'd, but I think there's relatively few Pokemon that would be less taboo to eat, like maybe a Magikarp. And I also think that there's relatively few people who would be up for it at all. So going back to that original question, is there anything that's different or special about grass-type Pokemon specifically? Because sure, there are many grass types that have animal elements, like a Go-Goat, for example, but there's also many grass types that are just plants with faces, like Sunflora, for example. So is it okay to eat those? Is eating a Bounsweet the same as eating a berry? And I think the answer is no. And that relationship that I talked about is definitely a big factor, but there's also nothing biologically different about grass-type Pokemon. Real-world animals and plants are completely different kinds of organisms down to the cellular level. But that's not the case when it comes to Pokemon. Bounsweet may seem totally different from something like an Absol, for example, but again, they can both breed with a Shiftry. So ultimately, they are the same kind of creature. And if we look at the case of vegans specifically, I think, again, the quick answer is no. Because if a Pokemon World vegan is not going to be okay with eating eggs or drinking moo-moo milk, they're also not going to be okay with eating the flakes off of Appleton's back or making tea with oddish leaves even if they dropped naturally. What might complicate this a little bit is Pokemon that have plant-like things growing on them, like Tropius or the Bulbasaur family. Now, Tropius's fruits are canonically edible and are frequently eaten as a snack according to the Pokédex, but are they vegan? And unfortunately, I think that's a question we can't answer confidently. Since we can't totally trust the Pokédex, we don't really know for sure if those plant-like growths are actually external to the Pokemon, like a symbiotic relationship between that Pokemon and some kind of plant. Although, personally, I don't think they are. I think they're just part of that Pokemon's biology. But even if they are external, we don't have any real-world parallels that we can compare them to. I don't know of any plants that grow on animals that we even could harvest for food, so I don't even know if that question is even considered by the standards of veganism. If you are a vegetarian or a vegan yourself, I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, maybe even a share. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you also to my patrons for their support, especially luxury patron Ethan Saffron. I'm Umbreon Libris. I'll see you in the next chapter.